Hey you guys, it's Professor Vitt. I wanted to make a small video for you guys on translations. We're not having class on Monday, and that's going to really affect what I had in mind. So I wanted to try and give you guys something to hold on to, something to work on between now and Wednesday. So I wanted you all to watch this video, and as I sort of go through it, I want you to get out a piece of paper and try to solve it yourself. So hit pause when you think you need to. Remember, we're going to work on this idea that we have another language that we're developing. It's a formal language. It's a language where we define what the words in it are and how the words all come together. And what we're going to do is take stuff from our normal, everyday, informal, natural language, and we're going to try and translate it into a formal language, a logical language. And then later, we're going to do stuff with this language. We're going to go back and we're going to show what validity looks like, two different ways with this language. So work for now on translations with me. Spend about 20 minutes a day on it, and then by Wednesday, you should be in good shape. So I'm going to take this sentence right here, Mary sings and Barry dances, and I'm going to translate it into sentential logic or propositional logic. And it's just a fancy way of saying logic on sentences or logic on statements. So I've translated every single one of these sentences beforehand as M, B, C, or D. So, and there will always be that little consultation up there. I have also listed all of our logical operators. Remember, this one's called negation. The name of the mark is a tilde, and it gets translated as not. It is not the case that. It is false that. So this is what the operator is in English, or excuse me, in our formal language. And these are the words in English that correspond to those words. So it's kind of like a translation, right? The book uses the symbol dot for conjunction. So we think of John fought the law and the law won. That word and we would represent as a dot. But here in this video, I use the ampersand because it's easier on my keyboard, and when I try to customize this, it doesn't really work well. So for purposes of this video, the dot and the ampersand both represent the logical function conjunction, the conjunction function. Then our next logical function here is, it's a little v, but it's actually a wedge. And it's pronounced wedge. And it stands for the logical function disjunction, and that is translated into English as the word or the words either or. So either you have peanut butter and jelly or you go hungry. Right? And so it's a way to say this thing or this thing. Now, we have two more to go, two more operators. This one here we call horseshoe. It stands for the words if, only if, and if then in English. This word here, only if, is a little bit tricky. We'll get into only if and if in class. So we'll do mostly if then. The name of this operation is the conditional. People will call it the material conditional if you really, really want to get fancy. I will call it horseshoe, or I'll call it arrow. And last but certainly not least, we have our logical operator, the triple bar, and it stands for the phrase if and only if, and it is called equivalence. Equivalence, meaning these two things must be the same. All right, so let's work on our translations. Here we go. Mary sings and Barry dances. So first thing you want to try to find is your operator. We have the word and, so that's going to go with the ampersand or the dot. And then I'm going to translate Mary sings into a propositional letter here, so M. And Barry dances is, oops, I'm sorry, it shouldn't be Barry, it should be Bob. What am I doing? Oh, it's crazy. Okay, so there we go. Bob dances, all better. Mary sings and Bob dances. We would translate that as M ampersand B. Ta-da! There it is, M and B. And the way to think about it is to say that this ampersand here corresponds to this natural language conjunction and. Mary sings stands for M and Bob dances stands for B. Or more properly, B gets translated as Bob dances, M gets translated as Mary sings. Okay, so that's our first translation. So Mary sings and Bob dances. We're saying that these two things are conjoined, meaning they're both true at the same time. Okay. All right, our next sentence is going to be a little more complex. Remember, we had this problem in logic about scope. So the example I used in class was Professor Vitt likes cheap wine and beer. So suppose people find this out, I like cheap wine and beer, and somebody shows up and they give me a really cheap bottle of wine, Thunderbird or something like that, or Riunite, some kind of, not very expensive wine. And I say, great. And then somebody else comes along and they bring a cheap beer. I don't know, insert cheap beer here, right? Mickey's, I don't know if Mickey's cheap. Maybe it's cheap, whatever. Some cheap beer, Natural Light, Keystone Ice, something like that. When somebody says cheap wine and beer, it's not clear whether they mean cheap wine and cheap beer. So I would bring, Riunite wine and Natural Light, or do they mean cheap wine and beer, meaning the only thing that's cheap is the wine and the beer can be just whatever beer it is, right? So the same thing is kind of going on here in that we have a sentence which has a bunch of conjunctions in it. And we're not sure where the scope is on different things. And so scope might be thought of as how do things crush together? And whenever we see a comma, like we see right here, with Mary and Don sing, comma, and Bob and Carla dance, when we see this little comma, it means, hey, you guys get together. So Mary and Don sing. Okay, well that means it's a conjunct on its own. So we're going to have Mary sings, so M ampersand D for Don sings and Mary sings. And then we're going to have a big conjunction, and then we're going to have another parentheses, Bob and Carla dance. So B and C. Let me show you what it looks like. So and I'll boom this up just a little bit so you can see what's going on. Notice that I could have rewritten this sentence to say Mary sings, semicolon, and Don sings. Why does that look funny? Oh, it's okay. Notice that I could have put the commas in other places, and that would have changed the order of these parentheses. So remember our little, what does that mean? Here's what it means. See this little comma right here? It tells us that we put a parentheses around the M and the D. It also tells us that whatever comes afterwards is also on its own. So we have B and C. So number 2 is basically a huge conjunct, right? It's a conjunction which itself consists of 2 conjunctions. So it's M and D and B and C, where M and D are one side of the conjunction and B and C are the other. But each side of the conjunction itself is composed of statements that are conjunctions. Okay, if that doesn't make sense exactly, it will as time goes on. And don't worry about it. We'll get more into this. It'll become more familiar. All right, next up. Okay, I should probably tell you guys to pause, right, so that you can, so that you have time. Oops, so you have time to try and figure out the translation on your own. So go ahead if you need to pause. All right. If Mary sings, then Carla dances. First thing I want to do is try to find our operator, a logical operator. And I see the word if here, which tells me immediately I've got a horseshoe. So if Mary sings, then Carla dances. So Mary sings is M. Carla dances is C. So M implies C. Here is our answer. M implies C. And remember, the first part of a conditional is called the antecedent, and the second part of the conditional is called the consequent. For a while, I'm going to use both, but in a week or two, I'm just going to drop off and say antecedent conditional. Okay, so if Mary sings, then Carla dances. That's our translation. Okay, so now our next one. Right here, number 4, we love you, number 4. So you might want to pause and try to translate it on your own for a second. All right, now, first thing we want to do is look for our logical operator. And when I read number 4, the very first word is if. So when you see the word if, you should automatically start thinking, yep, I just made a horseshoe sound. Horseshoe, right? You should be thinking about a horse. It's a conditional. If Dawn sings or Mary sings, comma. Okay, remember, the comma tells us, hey, all this stuff goes together. So what this comma is telling us is our antecedent includes Dawn sings or Mary sings. Then Carla dances. So the antecedent is itself got a little or in there. The or is a wedge. So we have if Dawn sings or Mary sings, then Carla dances. So here's our answer. D wedge M implies C. Now, you say, where's the horseshoe? Well, the horseshoe, remember, in the video is going to be an arrow because it doesn't seem like much, but it's actually terrible to try and jump back and forth between horseshoe, arrow, and the rest of the WebDings fonts. So this is our answer. If Dawn sings or Mary sings, then Carla dances. D wedge M implies C. Remember, the D wedge M all goes together because of this comma. All right, we're about halfway right now. We have 8 of these to do. These have been a little bit more straightforward, but as we move on, these will become a little more difficult. If you have a tough time and you're trying to figure out and you're burned out, take a break and come back. It's quite all right. I mean, you know, you'd rather come at this fresh. For some of you, you may say, no, I'm not going to hit pause. I'm good to go. That's perfectly fine too. But if you are getting discouraged, it's not because you're doing it wrong. It's because you're learning something that you've never seen before. Logic isn't something that most people are familiar with, and it's not something that comes naturally to a lot of people. I should know. It didn't come natural to me. So, but I can assure you, you'll do just fine. This is just the beginning. So let's look at our next translation. Make it a little bit bigger here. I wonder if I can make it any bigger. No, I'd lose a line. Okay. So, if, that tells us immediately we're looking at a conditional. Dawn sings or Bob dances. Whoa. Okay, so the antecedent of the conditional, the first part of the horseshoe, or the arrow, is going to say, Dawn sings or Bob dances. So Dawn sings is a D, or is a wedge, Bob dances is a B. So D wedge M, then, that's our arrow, telling us that we're moving into the consequent of the conditional. That is the second part of the conditional. Then, Mary sings, but Carla doesn't dance. Okay, well, but is a conjunction. I should have put it in here and I apologize. But for us, this but is a conjunction. It means this and this. You're asserting two things, right? So D wedge B implies Mary sings, which is an M, but Carla doesn't dance, and remember, Carla dances is a C, so we've got a not, so we put not C. So let's take a peek at our answer, and there it is in glorious Cambria font. If Dawn sings or Bob dances, Dawn sings, wedge, Bob dances, implies, remember this little comma right here tells us keep that antecedent disjunct all together, implies M and not C. Remember, Carla doesn't dance. Carla dances is C. So in order to get that information, we need to use our negation function right there. We need to put it in so we can say, hey, we're not saying Carla dances. We're saying it's not the case that Carla dances. That is your answer right there. D wedge B implies M and C. Okay, so let's do number 6 now. And if this one is big anyway, maybe I can make it in bolder font. Okay, so this is a much bigger sentence than what we've started with. And I want to just encourage you to just slowly go through this. If you try to take it all at once, you'll never make it. It's like eating a big steak, right? You cannot eat a steak and just swallow it in one bite. You have to slowly eat it. So I would encourage you to do the same when you're doing these translations, right? If Mary doesn't sing, then Dawn doesn't sing. And if Bob dances, then Carla doesn't dance. So we have an if that tells us we're going to have a horseshoe or an arrow. And the antecedent of our conditional is going to itself be a conditional. So the first part of our conditional will itself be a conditional. Okay? So this would be not M implies not D, paren, and if Bob dances, then Carla doesn't dance, B implies not C. All right, let's see what we've got here. Good. If Mary doesn't sing, then Dawn doesn't sing. Well, that's all this first part says here. If Mary doesn't sing, then Dawn doesn't sing. Comma, they're all together. And if Bob dances, B, then Carla doesn't dance, not C. So B implies not C. This sentence is a huge conjunct. It is a conjunction of conditionals. That's what you would say. And in the conditional here, both the antecedent and the consequent are negated. But over here, the antecedent isn't negated, but the consequent is. Okay, on to number 7. All right. If Bob dances, then Mary sings. Okay, so this is me telegraphing to you guys, you're going to have another conditional that is itself built up of some other conditionals. So if Bob dances, then Mary sings. So that's this part here, right? If Bob dances, then Mary sings. This part right here is just B implies M. But this word right here, if, tells us, this operator right here is going to be an arrow, which it is. So if Bob dances, then Mary sings, then if Carla doesn't dance, which is a not C, then Dawn sings, D. And here is your translation. By the way, it is really good practice to try and do these on your own, even after you've watched the video. A good example, I'm doing this, I must have translated sentences like this a lot. And yet, I still look and go, oh wait, did I get it right? You'll forget how they go. You'll forget how the translations go, and then you'll work them again, and you'll be able to do it. Translations aren't really a way. It's not really a question of memorizing exactly what number 7 looks like. Instead, it's a way of saying, well, how do I take English sentences and translate them into logical notation, no matter what the English sentence is, right? So that's kind of the goal. It's not to memorize that this is what number 7 looks like. We're going to be doing lots of translations. It's to understand why it looks like that. If you can understand why 7 looks like that, then you're going to be in really good shape when the translations become a little more complex. All right, last problem, number 8. It is a conditional. I see the word if here, so that it automatically tells me we're going to have some kind of an arrow or a horseshoe. If Mary or Dawn sing, so our antecedent is going to be M wedge D, then Carla dances. Okay. So our very first translation here, remember the semicolon tells us that all this stuff is going to be together. So this right here is all the first part of the conditional. In other words, this is all the antecedent of, excuse me, easy for me to say. This semicolon tells me that all of this stuff goes together in the parentheses. You can think in that sense of a semicolon kind of like a comma, but a more important one, right? So we're going to have M wedge D implies C. And then that stuff's going to be in parentheses. And, so that's going to be a conjunct. If Mary sings and Don doesn't sing, so M and not D, then B. And this is our bad boy right here. I'm going to make it a teensy bit bigger so you can see it. Okay. This part right here is this word and. So everything to the left is right here, and everything to the right of that sentence is over here. So let's just take it one at a time. If Mary or Don sing, M wedge D, then Carla dances, right? So see this? Here's our conditional. We know that because we have an if, then statement. So if Mary or Don sing, then Carla dances. There's our semicolon, boom, parentheses or a bracket, whichever. There are rules for parentheses and brackets. Don't worry about it for now. Now we have our and, the conjunction. It's this one. And if Mary sings and Don doesn't sing. So this is a conjunction, right? The antecedent, the first part of this conditional is itself a conjunction. If Mary sings and Don doesn't sing, M and not D, then Bob dances implies B. This is our main operator, and this is our big, huge translation. Okay. I encourage you guys, I will reproduce this little packet, and I'll post it on the LMS. That will help you work through these problems. I look forward to seeing you guys on Wednesday, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience. If you have any questions, email me. I'll talk to you guys soon.